So welcome to Archives Unleashed. My name's Ian Milligan. I'm at the University of Waterloo. I'm one of the organizers, and we'll get to meet the other organizers in a second. So I'll be the first to welcome you to Archives Unleashed, the New York Datathon, the virtual version. But of course, as you see here, thanks to all our sponsors, and we'll give some shout outs to them in a second. So let me be the very first to welcome you on behalf of the Archives Unleashed team, on behalf of Columbia University, on behalf of the Ivy Plus Libraries Confederation. Thanks for joining us online for this two-day Datathon. And you can see a picture of where we would be in better times. I'll just highlight, and this will come up a few times as we go through the opening slides. The name of the game is flexibility. We're operating in a new environment. You're probably all operating in new environments. Some of you have kids, some of you have pets who will meow all the time. Some of you may have the New York Times open in a browser tab. You should close it right now because it's addictive. The name of the game is flexibility. We know you might have to disappear. We know that you may not be able to give your full attention the whole time. We're aware of that, and we're just really encouraging people to, be flexible, be kind to each other as we figure out how we're going to do this online together. But we've done quite a bit of planning, and we're pretty confident we've got a great event planned. So what I'm going to do in the next few minutes is, first of all, introduce the rest of the team, talk a little bit about the goals and objectives of the Archives Unleashed Datathon, talk very briefly about web archives in their context, and then we'll talk logistics. How will we be communicating during this online Datathon? What kind of computing resources can we offer you? What data sets are available? And that's where we'll talk to our co-hosts at Columbia and Ivy Plus to talk about the data sets they've made available, the schedule, and then we'll turn it all over to you to introduce yourself. So I'll give you a quick shout out, and you'll be hearing from all these individuals over the next hour. I'm Ian, I'm at the University of Waterloo. Nick, who will be talking about the technical stuff, is at York University. Jimmy, who will be organizing the team formation activity shortly, is also from the University of Waterloo. Sam Fritz is our project manager at University of Waterloo. You've all been corresponding with her, and you will all get to know her quite well over the next 2 days. And then we'll be hearing from Pamela, Pamela Graham from Columbia University when we talk about data sets, Alex Thurman from Columbia, and Samantha Abrams from Ivy Plus Libraries Confederation. So this has been the team that worked together first to bring you the on-campus Datathon, and then has been working over the last few days or last few weeks to pivot this to an online event. So these are all the people. We usually put the photos up so you can come find us in the room. Because we're not in a room, we put our Slack handles up. So come find us on Slack. Feel free to DM anybody, or you'll see us all over that Datathon channel that you should all be part of now. And if not, we'll talk Slack shortly. So what are we hoping to accomplish over the next 2 days? Well, our goal here is really, first of all, to try to build community. We get everybody together in a room, or in this case, in a Slack channel, in a Zoom environment, trying to put faces to names, trying to learn from others who are interested in web archives and want to figure out new ways to work with them. We're hoping to articulate a common vision of web archiving development, tool development. What are the kind of common things that we all might need? Where should the community go? We want to avoid black boxes. We want you to be able to use tools that you kind of understand rather than just pressing a button and getting results that you might not know why you got that result. And of course, overall, it's that sort of mission to equip us as a collective to work with born digital cultural resources. Now, a lot of that for Archives Unleashed is obviously about web archives. And some of you may have heard me talk about this before, or others in our project, very forcefully talking about why we should care about web archives in particular. And to me, it's really a sort of, multifaceted answer. That how we preserve and disseminate cultural information has dramatically changed since the beginning of web archiving around 1996 at the Internet Archive, national libraries around the world, and which has dramatically sped up, obviously, over the last decade. That all means that how we remember has dramatically altered in scope, speed, and scale. We collect information. You click Save Page Now. My cat is in the background having fun. You click Save Page Now in the Internet Archive, and it's immediately accessible to researchers, which is mind-boggling. The scope of it, web pages that never would have ended up in a traditional repository are now routinely added at sort of a terabyte scale to these repositories. blogs, websites, Occupy Wall Street, all these things immediately ingested. And of course, the scale. The fact that we talk about petabytes of data routinely, and the amount of text and image and video that that represents, really to me represents a dramatic change in what we're doing. In other words, more data than ever before is being preserved, and it's being saved and delivered to us in very, very different ways. So lots of data about really cool stuff, as we're going to see at this Datathon. The problem is great data, and nobody really knows how to access it. And that's really disappointing, because I argue, and I'm a historian, and others here are historians too, is that I think if you're a historian and you want to study something after the 1990s, if you want to study, Clinton and Bush, if you want to study the Bush-Gore election, if you want to study Tamagotchi pocket pets, if you want to study the attacks of 9/11, if you want to study the dot-com boom, if you want to study what it's like to be a high schooler in the 2000s, you'd be really doing a real disservice to historical research if you didn't use web archives, if you didn't use blogs, if you didn't later on use social media streams. All of these things are sort of a rich documentary record of life. And so I think historians are going to have to come to grips with that. And that's happening really soon, because the 1990s are now history. 30 years ago, web archives have been going for over a quarter of a century. Suddenly people are going to want to ask questions, and we want to make sure they have tools to answer them. So yes, as I say here, web archives have been in existence since 1996. You can't study the 90s without web archives, and historians aren't ready. Now, they're not ready, not because we haven't been collecting the data. You're going to see some great data sets in a few minutes that, you can imagine. You could probably imagine thousands of uses for historians. But historians can't use those collections because the access quotient has really, really lagged. So if we want to use a web archive, what can we do right now? Well, you can use the Wayback Machine. And most people on this call have probably used the Wayback Machine. If you haven't, check it out, archive.org/web. I'm assuming if you're at a Web Archives hackathon, you've used the Wayback Machine. And you probably know where the Wayback Machine is great. It's great if you know what you're looking for. If you know the URL you want to find, if you know the keyword of a homepage you're looking for, if you know what the needle is, you can probably find it. If you care about the history of Columbia University, you can go to columbia.edu. You can watch that page evolve. But as soon as you want to get a bit more complicated than just very narrow queries, suddenly the Wayback Machine doesn't really scale to what a researcher might want. If you wanted to say, hey, I actually want to make a data set. I want to find websites that say, talk about climate change and link to the United Nations, you can't do that. Or you might want to do exploratory text mining. I want to take all of those pages from columbia.edu, or I want to take all those pages from the Government of Canada's COVID-19 response page, and I want to text mine them. You can't do that either. And you might want to do image work. Hey, we've got all these images, we've got all these videos, I want to extract them all at scale. What kind of pictures of cars were people talking about in 1996? We can't do that either. So if the Wayback Machine doesn't work, then we then go to the sort of layer of information that we'll be dealing with more in this Datathon here, which is the files that basically power the Wayback Machine. Now, these are called WARC files. They're web archive. They're ISO 28500:2009. It's an international standard. That's important because all WARC files should, and I put scare quotes around should because nothing is ever perfect, all WARC files should be the same, so we can develop tools that should all operate the same way on WARC files. So an international standard is really, really key because everybody in the world creates web archives in the same way, which lets the researchers begin to imagine how we could access them all in the same way. Now you can see a breakdown of what a WARC file is at right. It's, we'll take the example of Columbia University's homepage. You'd have HTML content. You probably have a JPEG. Let's say you've got a PDF link to it. You dig down, you've got legacy WordPerfect files. You've got Word document files. You've got all this sort of stuff in there. You don't want to be dealing with like a million old files, all collected at different areas, all with slightly different crawl dates and metadata. And so WARC file is like a giant container where you put those all together. So here, you have an HTML file at the top, then you have a JPEG, and that JPEG actually has its own metadata record attached to it. So it's sort of like a giant zip file, to simplify it, puts all this information together, and lets us use content from from archived web snapshots. Now the problem is that works are hard to use. It's an idiosyncratic file format. You can't necessarily go to Stack Overflow and read 7,000 posts about how to use a work file. And so the first step for a lot of what we do is usually trying to transform the data into something that's a bit more common. Let's try to get the work out of the way. Let's try to give people text files. Let's get the work out of the way. Let's give people image files. Let's get the work out of the way and give people hyperlinks that are found within them. Because work files are big, they're usually about 1 terabyte in size, and they're hard to use. So again, to recap, you got the Wayback Machine. That's cool if you know what you're looking for, but you really need something else to dig deeper. Then we have the work file, which powers the Wayback Machine. And it's really powerful, but really hard to use. So easy, hard, what do we do? So what can we do? Well, that's where all of you come in over the next 2 days as we come together for this online Datathon. So that's the web archive landscape in a nutshell. We'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. So if we're all going to rise to this challenge of figuring out how to work with web archive data in an online environment, well, we have to work in an online environment. So we're going to be rising to this challenge in a few different ways. And the first way we'll be rising to the challenge over the next 2 days is to make sure we communicate with each other. If we were all in New York, we'd be talking to each other over bagels and, I don't know, all the great stuff we had for catering. I don't want to go into details because it makes me sad. Instead, we'll be working on 2 platforms over the next 2 days to rise to this challenge, the first being Zoom. Zoom we're going to be using for all the synchronous moments of the Datathon, moments when we all want to try to be online, more or less, time zones may interfere, where we broadcast to you, and then we can occasionally do check-ins. We're all here in the same room. Most of the Datathon, though, to deal with web archives is going to be in Slack. That's how we're going to mostly talk to you. That's how you're going to talk to each other. You can use it also for phoning each other. We've got a fully fledged account, so you can set up voice calls, screen shares, etc. You should already be in the Archives Unleashed Slack. If you're not in the Archives Unleashed Slack, make a note to email Sam Fritz and just ask her to add, and we can get you in there as quick as we can. If you do set up a team, and we'll run a team formation exercise in a few minutes, you'll see that little plus button highlighted on the screen in front of you. Press the plus button and create a new channel. Don't create your own Slack workplace. Just create a channel in the Archives Unleashed thing, and then we can always come in and help troubleshoot as best we can. It's also important to be in there because if you scroll down on that sidebar, you can find my name. And if you don't find my name, you can click on me anywhere you find me in the Archives Unleashed area. Click message, send me a direct message, and I'm online the whole Datathon unless my kids explode. And we can help you out, or any other team member is always happy to help. And then, so Slack will be pinging you throughout the thing. I do want to create a special round of thanks to Samantha Fritz, who really made all this possible, from these slides to bringing this all together. And before we made the tough decision to cancel it, like we were doing menu planning, event planning, we, working with Pamela and Alex and Sam, we had great Wi-Fi all set up. But I just want to really give a thanks, especially to Sam, who put hours and hours of work into making an event that we had to very quickly change at the sort of last minute. So I'm going to give Sam a quick round of applause, just because she really made a lot of this possible and did most of the hard work. Okay, so we have Slack. We have Sam, who does all the cool stuff. We have computing resources for you. Nick's going to talk about this in a few minutes, but working with WARCs, working with web archive data requires lots of computing resources. The main way we'll be doing this throughout the Datathon will be through Google Colab. So Google Colab, these shareable notebooks. In the background, Google spins up a fairly powerful virtual machine, lets you work. You can share. We'll talk about the sort of pros and cons of how we share these notebooks. But most of what we're going to be doing will be on Google Colab. We also do have Compute Canada VMs, which are these machines. They're just kind of like Amazon Web Services machines. They sit in the cloud. Each of them has 8 virtual cores. Each of them has 30 gigs of RAM. If you're computationally fluent, if you love working on the command line, if you want to play with WARCs directly and work on a VM, just talk to us in Slack. We're not going to provide too much synchronous education on that, because they're challenging even in the in-person datathons, but these resources are here for you to use. And then we'll come back to this in a sec when I turn it over to Pamela, Alex, and Sam. I do just want to give quick thanks to Columbia again and Ivy Plus for sharing their collections for this event. And thanks to Nick, who you'll hear from shortly, for all of the technical setup, making the notebooks possible, working on the data sets, and making sure everything will be accessible for you to use over the next 2 days. What are we going to be doing in terms of schedule? As I mentioned for this datathon, we're going to be mostly asynchronous. Individuals are welcome to work alone. If you feel like you just can't commit to a team because of your personal circumstances that say been affected by things, that's fine. If you feel like you can work on a team, that's great. If you feel like you can work on a team and give it 50% of your attention, I think that's great too. But ultimately, it's up to you and your own recognition of the constraints that you're under. There'll be check-ins throughout the workday, as you see here. We're in our opening remarks, which will last until about 10:15 right now. We'll do a check-in today on Zoom at 4:30 p.m. Eastern. Again, if that time slot doesn't work for you, that's fine. That's just a chance for us to have a virtual coffee together. And then tomorrow we'll do check-ins at 9:30 and 2 p.m. Eastern, and then we'll do final presentations at 3:30 Eastern. So those are the only times to really pencil down, and we'll remind you on Slack. If you're able, it'd be great if you could hop onto Zoom and we can just all, kind of what we do if we were all in a room, have a quick chat about what's working, what's not working, that sort of thing. And this schedule, Sam shared that link with you all on email yesterday, and we'll post it in the Slack as well. So what tools will we be using in this datathon? And here I'll talk a little bit about Archives Unleashed before we get into data sets and teams. So you'll notice from the bottom, we keep calling this the Archives Unleashed Datathon. And we call this the Archives Unleashed Datathon because it's, of course, brought to you by the Archives Unleashed project, which is led by Jimmy, Nick, and I. We work with Sam, we work with others to basically achieve this goal that you see in front of you, which is to make petabytes of historical internet content accessible to scholars and others interested in researching the recent past. And what we thought petabytes was kind of hyperbole when we started. Like Nick, we're almost at a petabyte, right? Of data we've analyzed?
Yeah, we're at like 980 or so terabyte we've analyzed over like the last year and a half. So cool. Almost a petabyte.
So we're almost there. Quick, run some cloud jobs. We'll show you that in a second. So basically our goal when we develop these tools is, and we run these datathons for people to work with them, are to come up with relatively easy to use tools, relatively easy to use, as you'll all discover. Trying to make transparent tools that people can understand. That's why, I'm a historian, I'm not a computer scientist. I want to make sure tools I can understand and that my colleagues can understand. And then crucially, we really want tools that can push forward research in history, in the library and archives field, and in computer science. That, we want to make novel contributions in all three of those subject domains. Some of you would have done the really detailed homework where you set up a Docker instance. And a lot of what we do ultimately boils down to the underlying code base of the Archives Unleashed toolkit. So the Archives Unleashed toolkit is an open source platform for analyzing web archives with Apache Spark. When we talk about the cloud in a second, when we talk about the notebooks that you'll be using mostly through Google Colab, underneath all of that rests the toolkit. So the toolkit takes WARCs and analyzes them. The first thing I like to highlight about the Archives Unleashed toolkit is that it's scalable. That we can use the same code, the same program on a powerful cluster, what we would have called a supercomputer back in the day, but like a powerful cluster. A really powerful single node server. We could use it on our laptop. Sarah, for example, who's doing her PhD at Waterloo, she's done a lot of work with GeoCities. That's about 4 terabytes. I've actually processed all of GeoCities on the laptop I'm using to talk to you right now. And Jimmy wrote a little paper a few years ago. You can even run the toolkit on a Raspberry Pi if you were so inclined. What it is, and you can check out the docs, and we can drop that in the Slack channel if you're curious, is basically it's a set of recipes. And it's a set of recipes that takes work files, extracts useful information, and filters them. So we can use the toolkit to work with text. We can use it to work with links, images, binary analysis on PowerPoint files or Excel spreadsheets or Word documents, etc. And you can use it both in sort of the original Brazilian distributed data set, standard way, but now we're actually doing everything in data frames. So it's like a big giant spreadsheet, and you'll see data frames shortly. Some examples would be, let's say you take a work file and you're interested in doing some of those things I mentioned before that the Wayback Machine couldn't do. So here you can take work files and you could say, I want to filter by domain. I want to find I just want pages from greenparty.ca, or I just want pages from columbia.edu. You could filter by URL pattern. I just want the text on columbia.edu/history. I don't want boilerplate. Try to get rid of the advertisements as best you can. I just want dates. I just want data from July 2015, or maybe you just want language. I just want French language pages. I just want English language pages. And that filtering mechanism, and that's also present in the notebooks that you'll be working with shortly, it's all about taking unimaginable amounts of data and filtering it down to your research query so it's something digestible that you can work with on your laptop, or you can work with over a 2-day datathon. So that's the toolkit. On top of the toolkit, we also have something which we'll just put here. If you're an Archive-It subscriber, we'd love for you to check it out. We have a platform called the Archives Unleashed Cloud. Now the toolkit, as those of you who tried to run it in Docker know, it's persnickety. It's tough to use. Historians aren't going to learn how to code in Scala or even Python at the level needed to use the toolkit. And so we have the Archives Unleashed Cloud, which is a GUI-based front end to work with the toolkit. We run the canonical version at cloud.archivesunleashed.org. We'll drop a link into the Slack. If you're an Archive-It subscriber, you can go to the cloud right now, create an account, sync your collections, and work with them. We've been working with integration with other Wasapi endpoints, which is a sort of standard for transferring data, but right now it's only Archive-It that we support. But the idea here is that you take a basic set of research, you take your collections, and out of that you can download text, out of that you can download hyperlinks, out of that you can download stats about your collection. You could then use it in a digital humanities environment without needing to use the work file. And we'll show you that again shortly, because the notebooks that we'll be using, they often flow right out of the cloud. We use the cloud to process data, and then we give the notebook to researchers, and researchers can work with this data. So that's basically what the sort of underpins most of the Archives Unleashed project. What I want to do now is turn it over to talk a little bit about our data sets. And so I'll ask Pamela, Alex, or Samantha to speak to the data sets that we have here in a few minutes. So I guess maybe Sam Abrams, you're up first for Ivy Plus.
Sure. So there are a bunch of them. I think at the time we did this, is this like 16? Some of these are bigger than others. I think the Contemporary Composers is like 900 sites, and the state elections is like 2,000. But the general idea behind the Confederation is that I am a technical expert in web archiving, and I help subject specialists build curated collections around a topic that interests them. So a lot of times these collections are mimicking print collections or complementing print collections. So that might be an interesting, I guess I've always been interested in like, what are we collecting in these web collections that are also in print, or maybe are not in print at all. But yeah, I mean, that's essentially the context. They're built by, I guess I should say, the 12 of the 13 Confederation members. So I can never rattle them off my head. But Brown, the University of Chicago, Cornell, Columbia, Duke, Johns Hopkins, Harvard, Stanford, the University of Pennsylvania, Princeton, Yale. I don't know how many that is. But yeah, it's a really interesting project in which people with similar interests across a large group of institutions come together to build a shared collection. So I'm happy, if anyone ever throughout the next 2 days has questions about specific collections, I'm happy to answer those. I think if you click on these links, every collection has like a short description that explains the scope, but I'm happy to shed additional information or light on anything.
Awesome, and we will make these slides available, and if you click on these are all links to click on. to read a little bit more about all those cool data sets. And then Alex or Pamela, do you want to speak to the Columbia data sets?
Yeah, so at Columbia, our two largest collections were actually too big to be processed for this event, because our human rights collection, which we've been building since 2008, has 15 terabytes, and our university archives Columbia domain stuff is about 8 terabytes. So those collections are not available for this because they're just too big. So the ones that are left are the ones you see on the screen. I'll start with the resistance collection. That was a collection of grassroots organizations that sprung up after the election of Donald Trump. We started crawling, I think, in April of 2016. April of 2017, and have been crawling ever since. And so most of the stuff in there is grassroots groups organizing protest demonstrations and things like that. But then as new things come up, there are new angles of resistance, such as, or sort of culminating in the impeachment stuff. So there's about impeachment content in there as well. Stonewall 50 Commemoration is a smaller collection. It was based on a short focused amount of crawling in 1 month. I think it was June of last year, in which happened to represent the 50th anniversary of the Stonewall riots in New York City, the important gay rights movement. And so there were celebrations all over the country and the world in honor of this 50th anniversary. And so we wanted to capture a lot of those events, the web presence for a lot of those events. And so you have a lot of stuff from June 2019, I believe, around those events. Freely accessible e-journals was just a kind of experimental thing where we identified 50 or 60 freely accessible e-journals and started archiving those, but it was not intended to be a permanent thing, and unlike most of our collections. So I think it's a smaller set from like 2010 and later. I'm pleased to see the Avery collection in here. It's the largest one that's represented here among the Columbia ones. But if you look at our collection page for that, now you'll see it's changed its name because basically it had a broader focus than New York City to start with, and it had the title you see there. But since then, it's diverged into two separate collections, one of which is solely devoted to the websites of Frank Lloyd Wright properties. So that content is in this data set that you see here. And the rest of it is New York City, is now called New York City Places and Spaces. And it is historic preservation, urban planning organizations, but it has a tighter New York City focus. So both of those stuff is available in the database, in the data set you see here. RBML is not so much a thematic collection as the websites of individuals and organizations that have given their physical archives to Columbia. And so sometimes they have websites as well, and those are in there. And lastly, the Brick collection is a large collection of the websites of religious organizations, whether they're churches, mosques, temples, any religious tradition that we are aware of. We try to seek out their sites, and it has over 700 or 800 sites at this point, but they're all physically based in New York City. So it can be an interesting collection for a sort of slice of life of religious activity in New York. And I'm happy to give you, if you have any questions about any of these, you can just email me or Slack me or whatever. And as Sam said, there are brief descriptions of these if you click on the links.
I'll just add a quick footnote there. I'm really interested in, if questions do come up about what's in the archives or how things were collected, I'm interested in kind of making note of those kinds of questions as we think about improving the ways that we are describing collections at the collection level and meeting the needs that people would have as they turn to them as data, like questions you may have about comprehensiveness, validity, and those kinds of things that come up with data And we haven't always brought that kind of description to web archives, where we've had a more focus on archival or bibliographic kinds of description. So I have my ears perked up to learn what I can if those kinds of questions do come up or among folks here, and be glad to make note of those, just for helping us in our work going forward.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. So when we do the team formation activity, you'll also see a big list of these data sets, so you don't have to memorize all of them in front of you. But if you also look at the Slack channel, we've dropped the link to all the slides in, so you can go in, and if you're curious, what's in the webcomics web archive versus the, Me Too and the women's rights movement in China web archive, all of that stuff is there. So thanks very much, Sam, Pamela, and Alex, for not only talking here, but also, more importantly, making your data sets accessible so that we could play with them over the next 2 days. So now we're going to take a break from us talking at you to our next sort of interactive moment, which is, if we were in person, we'd be doing tons of cool stuff with sticky notes. But because we're online, we're going to do tons of cool stuff with virtual sticky notes. Before I turn it over to Jimmy, who's going to run this activity, I mentioned earlier that we're flexible in how we do this. Traditionally, we do generally try to do teams of 3 to 5 people. And I think in general, that's still ideal. It's a datathon, you can work with each other, you can share the load, etc. But of course, because the world is an interesting place today, you might have kids in the room, you might have cats jumping on you, you might have things that you would not have had 3 weeks ago going on in your life. If you feel like you can't collaborate, do feel free to work as an individual. We're totally flexible. And we'll just highlight, if you do form teams, and we're hoping that quite a few teams do form, we just encourage you, as teams, be considerate of each other, especially the unique circumstances we're all under. If people have to disappear to take care of kids or dogs or cats or their health or anything, life obviously comes first. That's true like all the time, but that's especially true during a pandemic. A mix of asynchronous and synchronous work, that's what we've all been doing for the last few weeks. We find that's probably the right way. We won't want you to feel like you have to be on a Slack call for 8 hours straight. Connect when it makes sense to work, work independently when it makes sense to work independently. And of course, if you feel like you want to talk to each other, you can always use the text, but all of you, and we can walk you through it if you haven't used Slack much, you can actually, any channel you set up a call, and we can do unlimited calls going on in the system at any time. So that can sort of replicate talking at the in-person event. So in general, here we said, in general, teams in the past, we've run a few of these datathons. This is like our 8th or 9th we've run. Teams of 3 to 5 is ideal, but if you're worried that you might have to disappear for a bit of the datathon, join a big team, and then you can do a small part of a bigger project that a team is doing. So as we say here again and again, flexibility is the name of the game, and of course being kind to each other during these times. So I'm going to turn it over to Jimmy Lin here. We'll drop a link to the team formation spreadsheet, and Jimmy, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and then maybe you can share your browser window here.
Okay, I think everybody can see my screen now, right?
Yep.
Okay, so I'll begin with a confession. I've never actually done this before. Well, I've done it in the physical sense. If we were all physically in Columbia, this would be a fun exercise in which we'd write on sticky notes, walk around the room, post these notes on a whiteboard, move the notes around, and all as a part of a tried and true brainstorming method that we've run several times now, with the ultimate goal of putting everybody in groups of 4 or 5 that we're aiming for to start off your projects. But given the circumstances in the world, we have to make do with the tools that we have, which is all virtual. So it goes back to my original opening statement. I've never done this before in the context of a virtual exercise. So we'll see how this goes. So please bear with me and be patient. Okay, so as I mentioned, the ultimate goal at the end of this exercise is to get everybody in groups working on projects. And the projects will be at the confluence of three different things, right? We want to put three different elements together. And they are the three columns that you see in this spreadsheet. So they're going to be at the confluence of a research question, what data set you are going to use to answer that research question, and what technique you're going to use in order to operate on the data set in service of the research question. Right? And we came up with these three columns, these three groups, if you will, based on our experience very early on in running these datathons. We've discovered that in order to have a successful project, you really need to have three different sets of stakeholders. The tool makers that build the tools, the computer scientists, the geeks like myself in the room who build the tools. You also, once you have the tools, you also need something for the tools to operate on, right? And this is where the content gatherers come in. These are the librarians, the archivists, the curators, the builder of collections. Now, of course, you have these tools and you have the collections. You want to do something with them. All of this is in service of scholars, historians, social scientists that want research questions answered. Right? So we're all sort of coming to this kind of like the blind men in an elephant analogy, right? We each all have our own expertise, and we're trying to feel around this elephant that is web archiving. And so we found that it is nice to sort of first proceed along these three dimensions, and then try to bring them together for the actual team formation process. Okay, so that's the background, right? Now, in terms of the exercise that we're all going to do now is the instructions are actually summarized at the top. So what everybody's going to do is they're going to populate the cells with a short description of their interests, as detailed or as brief as you want, and you put them in the columns that they correspond to. So, for example, you see the examples at the top. I am interested in named entity recognition, and I want to do something along those lines. I don't really have a question in mind. I don't really have a data set in mind, but I know I want to do named entity recognition. So there's a sticky note for that. There's also sticky notes for people in the middle column, right? So I really don't have the necessary tools or even the collection in mind, but I'm interested in a particular set of questions. Those go in the middle column. And on the right column, those are for people that are interested in a particular data set. Like, I don't really want to care what I do with this data set, but I just really want to work on this data set. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's sort of the first stage of the brainstorming exercise, is everybody just gets their ideas in the form of these virtual sticky notes. Now, once these ideas are on the board, we'll start using the comment feature inside each cell to sort of play upon each other's ideas. So you use the comments to do a thumbs up saying, hey, I want to work on this. Maybe I want to work on this, but I want to ask for some clarification. Do you mean this or that? And then eventually start to bring the threads together across the three columns. All right, and we sort of have a made-up example here in the example at the top, right? So there's a use and you can go here and when you hover over each of the cell, you can start to see the thread that emerges, right? Do we want NER? Do we want NLP? Hey, this connects with this, for example, this one. Hey, why don't we use NER for this? And then we're hoping that all of these comments can start to converge towards the formation of the groups.
So I'll just jump in here real quick and maybe show some things that I'll go over in a little bit. So I guess it'll be kind of a pre-fresher. I don't know. Puns are fun. So portmanteaus. So with the data sets, most of the data sets, so if you click on that Zenodo link, I'm talking about what I've dropped in our Slack channel here. Each of these Zenodo links are going to have two files with them. They'll have a Parquet file and an awk file. All of the Colab notebooks are set up really to use, or they're set up to use the Parquet files. And the Parquet files are like, they're basically, they are data frames. And so if you're familiar with like spreadsheets or anything like that, you can start filtering and searching and doing lots of fun stuff with them. And then the second link I put in there is the data frame schemas. So to give you an idea of like the columns that we've extracted for each of these like sub data sets, I didn't do all, like if you're looking at this second, actually, you know what, let me see if I can steal this real quick. Give me one moment. Steal Jimmy's thunder real quick. Screen, docs, new. Data frame schemas. All right, let's see if this works. Share. Can you, Jimmy, can you stop sharing real quick? Cool. Thank you. Share. I want this. Yeah. So this is what I'm talking about. Okay. So each one of these like spreadsheets or like data frames or whatever that you can load into the Colab notebooks are going to have basically almost all or all of these data frames available. The only one I did not do for all of them, confusingly, is the one that we call all, just because they're so big. Like this derivative data is so big because it's basically everything in the WARC file. So we'd be replicating the whole data sets or the entire like WARC files, and you wouldn't be able to work with them in Colab. So, but like, so some of the questions that you're asking about, like what you can ask the data, is available in these columns. So like there's the web page is one, which you have the content, which is the actual content of the web page. Then you also have the language that we identify with Tika. And then we have the MIME types for each one of the resources. So each row in the data set is a particular like resource, like web archive resource or record. So it's like the URL, the crawl date, MIME types that were identified, the language, and the content. And I'll go over this a little bit in, I don't know, 10 minutes or so. Then you have like the image link ones. Then you have like binary extractions. So you have the actual images data frame. And so you have the crawl date, the extension, the file name, and then also with the image graph. I can't remember if I did this before or after we did some updates, but we'll find out. But there's a web graph and an image graph, so you could see like what links and what the URL is. And that's the basic gist of it. The other thing that I was going to show and talk about is one of the nice things with the notebooks, the way we've set up things. So like giving you just a Python notebook, you can just start pulling in stuff. So Archive It has a couple undocumented APIs, and in here, I'm just showing because you can steal from other people's notebooks, and then the documentation we link out to a bunch. But Ed Summers has been working on a little side project you might have been seeing tweeting about. But in this, so this kind of gets to some of the questions or discussions that Pamela and Alex and a couple others have talked about, is like pulling the metadata actually from Archive It out. And so like you just have to figure out a way to marry these two data sources. But this gives you kind of if you look at this particular row right here or in the notebook, this is how you can look at the seed API from Archive It. There's also a collection to APIs. So I think if I can dig up how it works, or like how my understanding of it works, but you can pull some like rudimentary collection metadata. It's basically like Dublin core metadata about the actual Archive It data set. If you just replace seed with collection or collections, you can ping that too and pull back some data. But that's, I guess I'll stop here for now unless other people have questions, but I'll go over most of this all in a fair bit more detail here in a little bit.
Okay, all right, so how are we doing? Continuing to run the commentary on the team formation board. Okay, so sounds like we have 1, 2, 3, 4 proto groups. Okay, shall we put sort of these placeholders in these proto groups and then turn our attention to Nick?
So this is gonna be fun. I'm gonna do a live demo with my daughter. So say hi, Isabel.
Hi, Isabel. All right, there's your slide, Nick.
All right, cool. So what I'm going to do is kind of give a little bit of an overview of the kind of like analysis resource that we've provided and do a bit of a live demo and walk through to hopefully inspire folks or at least make you all feel a little bit more comfortable given the environment. So basically, I guess the background for this is I'll put this in. If you read the post that we did on our blog or Medium site a couple weeks ago, it's basically the background is like we've done 8 or 9 of these datathons, and we've done a bunch of data sets, and we've started with like making or helping people or teaching people how to use the toolkit, and there's a lot of command line, and it's really difficult, and it takes a really special group of people to make something like that work. But these datathons bring like a very broad audience of humanities researchers, social sciences researchers, librarians and archivists, like the whole GLAM community, and then an occasional computer scientists. So there's a high barrier to entry. So I guess the long story short is like we've continually iterated over like the datathons to make them better, where we get feedback from attendees, but also make them, I guess, easier or like more approachable in terms of like using the tools. So for basically our final datathon, which is what this one is, since the IPC one in Montreal was canceled, we were going to try an experiment, and hopefully this experiment even works even better with given the distributed environment of this datathon, which is using Google Colab to use the notebooks. So the idea here is, like in the past, we had our standard set of derivatives, which were like a big giant text file, a graph file that you could put in Gephi, and like a domains count. And that kind of like was like, oh, you got to use your like custom tools, and there was a higher barrier to entry. And we've gone through and updated the toolkit to pull in data frame support in the newer versions of Spark. So for those of you that are not familiar with data frames, like it basically looks like a spreadsheet. There's columns and there's rows of data that we've extracted from the web archives. And we have a number of those, I guess, data frames or spreadsheets that should be, I hope, a lot more approachable and easier to use, and kind of gives you a fair bit of inspiration to like get up and running. So basically like front loading your research and providing with that type of data. The other thing is looking at like the whole like Thomas Padilla's and Library of Congress's like hard work behind collections as data, and looking at all these web archives that our partners at Ivy Confederation and in Columbia have done over the years. Like you've heard Pamela and Alex talk about, they've been doing this for 12 years. And I hope to really expose this type of work they've done and allow it actually to be really, really used. And I don't know, like a normal archive. So then the other thing is so instead of like forcing everybody to on the command line and using like these tough Hadoop and Spark utilities with a very high barrier to entry, continually move closer to the users. And with these Colab notebooks, it's just basically a basic Python and Pandas environment. And there's a whole wealth of research and support materials out there on the data science side of things. So it should be easier, I hope, to get up and running. And then in the, I'll show here in a second when I take over the screen, and the README file for the GitHub repo with the notebooks, there's a whole bunch of, I guess, links. Actually, can you stop sharing, and I'll just use that as a pivot point. Cool, thanks, Ian. Where are we at? Five. This one. So, like, if you go to the GitHub repo, maybe Sam or Ian can drop this in real quick, so you know where I'm going. If you look down, you scroll down, and this README for the Datathon page, there's some inspiration links. There's Tim Sherritt's really awesome work with the GLAM workbench, and there's a number of other just kind of links out to notebooks and types of things that you can do, and should be able to just kind of like pull in and maybe copy and paste and just have fun and experiment. So that said, I'm going to try to do a live demo and introduction to the notebook with the baby. In the Datathon directory, there are two, what's up, bud? Notebooks that I'll go over real quick. We have the Stonewall example and the Popline one. The big difference between the two is like the first one just kind of shows you how to load up some data sets or some Parquet derivatives as I guess data sets in the notebooks, and do some basic analysis and some charting. The text analysis one is my attempt at doing some rudimentary text analysis and inspiration. I pull in some libraries, and then for folks that are really interested in the NER side of things, I pull in the Spacey, the library, and you can do some basic examples of what you can do with that. So to get started on your teams, what you'll want to do is click on one of these two. The ones that say _CC VM, those are for like if you want to use those on the Compute Canada VMs. And unless you really, really want to do that, I would recommend just using the Google Colab, because the resources are basically the same that Colab gets you. So click on one of these. At the top, you'll see an Open in Colab button. You click on that, and it should open in Colab. Beards and babies are fun. Come on, bud. Okay. And then the first thing you'll want to do, like when this notebook opens, is click Copy to Drive, and this you'll create a copy of your own that you can work with. And then what you'll do is the next thing you'll do is change the name of it. And if you look at, on the top of your tab names, if you change the name of it, it'll be easy to kind of sort things out. And then you can say, hey, what your team name is, and then hit enter, and you'll see it kind of change right up here. So if you have a bunch of these open, if your teammates are working on notebooks as well and you want to see them, you can jump to them fairly quickly. The other thing that you'll want to do kind of right away is if you I need my hand. Come on, Lizzie. Thanks. Click on the share link and do get a shareable link. And then by default, it'll just be a canned view. Uh-oh. And you can copy this link and drop this into your Slack team channel or whatever channel you're working with. So real quick with the notebooks, somebody's getting fussy. Each one of these notebooks, you're going to have a lot of canned information about this particular collection. The thing that you can do though is I'll show how to do one thing real quick, is any one of these data sets, the Zenodo links that are all linked out. If you scroll down to the bottom where it says Parquet, If you right-click on any one of these, you'll have your link to the derivative data, and then you can jump back here in the notebook, and all you have to do is literally just change this URL and say, hey, and paste it in, and then hit capture. You can change the other variables if you want. Oh no, buddy. And then it'll start downloading the data set, and then it'll extract it, and then you can start working with it. Then in the notebook itself, I provide a lot of, like, I guess, help prose in explaining what I'm doing, and I hope it makes sense. If it doesn't, just feel free to ping me. We load up some libraries, and then this is an example of how to load one of these derivatives that we put up here. So like, say the images one. Oh no. And so we load this up as a data frame and see what I was talking about. You see basically like a spreadsheet. Come on, bud. Oh, no. Oh, you got beard hair. And you can jump through each one of these, and you can do some rudimentary analysis. Uh-oh. And there's some examples of graphing things. This is fun here. And so that's this one. I'll just jump through this real quick because she's getting cranky. I'm sorry. We badly timed this, my partner and I. The other one, if you look at the, I'll try to do two real quick. If you look at the pop line one, I'll just, come on. Let's go, bud. Let's load. If any teams are working on multilingual content, I know the Caribbean and Latin America one, if you check out this one, the Pandas Parquet example in the root of the directory, I was doing that one for the Datathon, the IPC Datathon in Montreal, and we used the BONC, the Quebec National Library, their data set. So there's a bunch of French and English in there, and I split apart the work between French and English in the text analysis. So that might be worth looking at if you're going to work with Spanish language material and I guess other languages that are in the data set if you want to pull things out to do analysis with. So hopefully this one opened up. Oh, I clicked on the wrong one. No. Let's click on the right one. Yeah, here we go. Hopefully it'll go quick. We're almost done. Almost done. Say hi. And I'll just scroll down here. This one provides an example of pulling things in, doing some rudimentary analysis using PySpark, and then handing it off to Pandas. So you can take a PySpark data frame and hand it over to Pandas. There might be some memory issues there, depending on how big the data set that you're working with. So that's something to keep in mind. And then finally, it's like down here is what I want to show with the NER stuff. When you pull in Spacey, you can do, this is just a really quick rudimentary, like, hey, check out NER stuff and this page. And this is the type of content you get back. So hopefully this all provides some good examples and inspirations of what you can do. We can scroll down. And then, because everybody loves word clouds, you can make a word cloud at the end of what you want to do. So I think that's it, unless anybody has any questions. I'm gonna mute and kind of hang around.
We'll put this slide up, and this is sort of just a reference checklist to have. But basically at this point on, hopefully you've got a good sense of who, sorry, I'll put my video back on. You'll have a good sense of who your team members are. So your first step is to really sort of collectively choose a team name. And then we'd ask you to set up a public Slack channel. So if you have questions, I can drop another screenshot into the New York Datathon thing. But basically, you'll see a little plus sign at the top of that channel list. Click plus, and then we're asking, just because we all have like a billion Slack channels, to name them something like NY 2020 dash webcomics or NY 2020 dash Stonewall, something like that. As sort of facilitators, we'll be in and out, so we'd like them to be public because we'd like to be able to sort of not spy on what you're doing, but see what's going on and offer help as we can. And then you should probably set up your Colab notebooks. Nick gave a demo, but you'll also see this YouTube link, which Sam will drop. It's about a 1.5-minute video. It's like really well designed. It's got cool arrows and things, basically walking you through the process of doing what Nick just showed you to make sure you can get going. The quick tips we'll make, as you have those public Slack channels, if you're working in the public Slack channel with your teammates, you'll see a little phone icon up near the top. You can just click that phone icon at any time and make a voice call with your teammates or selected teammates, and feel free to use that as much as you want. When you're working with others, you can share your Colab notebooks, but we are asking people, share to your own drive, because 2 people can edit a Colab notebook at the same time. It's not a great seamless experience, and you'll probably break your notebook pretty quickly. So you should all have your own notebooks. Look at your other notebooks, but when you share them to other people and you click that share button, try to share them as view only so that you don't all get confused. We're happy to troubleshoot. Most of the stuff's cross-platform. We're unfortunately all on Mac or Linux, so sometimes there's Windows issues, but hopefully that won't be a factor with Google Colab. And then we'll come back to this, but our big last moment where we're all, hopefully always synchronously back together, although we'll have check-ins, is Friday, March 27th at 3:30. We're aiming to do final presentations. Teams, aim for 5 minutes, use Google Slides, and just sort of a show and tell of what you've been able to do. You know, talking about your questions, talk about your methods, your analysis, your results, and lessons learned. Are there any questions that people might have? Feel free to unmute and ask right now, because we're all together. We might not be back together till this afternoon. Obviously, just DM me if it's another question too. Perfect. So these slides are all up. This is just a reference page. There again is that YouTube video, which is like really well designed. Sam made a great video, and it's something we'll probably be using a lot for other things as well. But basically, there's those 2 notebook templates, the pop line and the Stonewall. Again, click that button that says Open in Colab, click Open to Drive, open the newly copied notebook, and you're off to the races. There's that walkthrough of sharing it with your team and making sure it's view only. Again, that's all in that YouTube video, which has been shared with y'all. So if you're a team and you're sort of at this point, hopefully you're starting to talk, but as you talk, here are some framing questions we've used. If you're still sort of figuring out what exactly you'll be looking at, are you looking at a specific data set? Do you have a research question that lends itself to a particular data set? What kinds of data do you want to extract and explore? Are the questions you're looking at the kinds that will be dealt with text? Are these images, etc.? What kind of tools have you used? What kind of tools are you experienced with? Feel free to think outside of the box and use web services. Like some of the coolest stuff are things I'd never heard of that maybe you used in another capacity. Do you have an end goal in mind? And again, we're just always asking very short time, especially because we're working in a distributed environment, you know, making sure that things are as feasible as they can be, given the relatively short time we all have. So all these are going to be there for reference. As we close this off, I'll just say thanks again to all our sponsors. This wouldn't have been possible without the support of the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, which was, you know, paying for travel and catering and all that, and is now generously paying for our Zoom subscription, but also makes all the tools and platforms and our time possible to work on this. Thanks, of course, to Columbia University Libraries and Ivy Plus Libraries Confederation for both co-hosting this datathon, providing data sets, providing, you know, inspiration to run this event. To Compute Canada, Canada's sort of national computing federation, for High Performance Computing Federation for providing compute. And then to my university, the University of Waterloo, Nick's University, York University, Start Smart Labs, which has provided additional funding to our project, and the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada. But it, you know, I always love this slide because it just shows that it's, you know, it takes many, many people to bring an event like this, and we're all grateful for their support of making this possible. So with that, I'll you know, give you all a round of applause for sticking it through the Zoom environment. I see some twinkling hands. That's awesome. And we'll let the hacking begin. We'll be mostly over in Slack, but we'll reconvene at the end of the day on Zoom, and we'll send a link out and reminders out about that.